Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to milk this for another second here with this jersey on, so if you guys don't mind. There we go. Tampa! There we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Brookings Institution. It's also Thursday of Infrastructure Week, which has been, there we go. I think a bigger cheer for Infrastructure Week, which I'm not totally surprised. And you can also see that clearly today it's also a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan zone, which is not typical for any jersey, and certainly one of this fan base at the institution. My name is Adi Tomer. I direct infrastructure work here at Brookings Metro. And on behalf of all of my colleagues across the institution, I want to thank everyone who made the time to join us today, whether online, streaming, or here in person in DuPont Circle. To those of us who work in the infrastructure space, it's really the most exciting moment in decades for us. Between the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, our team estimates that the federal government is going to be investing over $1.25 trillion in transportation, energy, water, broadband, and nature-based infrastructure systems over the coming 5 to 10 years. This truly is a historic moment. Putting aside ongoing federal affairs, from standing up new programs to ensuing permitting negotiations, the buck has now, though, mostly passed to states and localities. Money is flowing, grant applications are live, private capital is ready to move. But there are real constraints to achieving public goals. Inflation and higher interest rates are eating into project budgets. We have too few workers in the skilled trades. And above it all, it takes genuine leadership to bring communities and jurisdictions together around a common vision. Overcoming those and other obstacles are what it takes to make this investment moment count. To ground all this, we are delighted to have Tampa Mayor Jane Castor with us. I'm obviously not hiding my fandom for the city and region this morning. My mom and uncles grew up in the city, and I was raised 50 miles south in Sarasota. Through all of those decades, Tampa has basically never stopped booming. And yet with all that growth comes the need to constantly reinvent and reinvest. And that's exactly what Mayor Castor and her team are making happen. I could stand up here for way too long listing all the investments their team is doing, from the less visible work, like a multi-billion-dollar water and wastewater infrastructure program, to investing in the port to boost economic competitiveness both for the region and, frankly, the country, to redesigning safer streets and building one of the best riverfront developments anywhere in the country. But why hear it from a fan when you can hear it from an actual person on the team, if you will? Mayor Jane Castor has worked for the city and community for over 3 decades, including as chief of Tampa Police for 6 years, and now serving as city mayor since 2019. Mayor Castor, thank you for being here and all of your civic service to the region. The floor is yours.
Wow, with an introduction like that, I should just drop the mic, right? Say, okay, we're done. I'm so excited. Thank you for the invitation from the Brookings Institute, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, and go Bucks, without a doubt. But I'm very excited to be in front of you today to talk about some of the challenges that cities are facing on the ground when it comes to the implementation of infrastructure projects, particularly those that are funded in part by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act that we just heard about. But before I talk about those challenges, I want to start by saying the passage of these 2 pieces of legislation have truly created a historic and transformative opportunity to address the nationwide backlog of critical infrastructure projects. Our nation's cities are grateful, and I want to say that again, our cities in this nation are grateful for the bipartisan work that went into making years of talk about infrastructure funding a reality. Infrastructure is the foundation of a strong city. You hear me say that all the time in my speeches. From water, wastewater, and stormwater pipes that run beneath our streets, to the sidewalks, bike lanes, and bridges that connect people, jobs, schools, and each other. In a city, municipal infrastructure means everything. When it's in good shape and working well, our residents don't think anything of it. They just turn on the faucet, water comes out, and they can get from point A to point B safely in their cars or on their bikes. But when water infrastructure starts to deteriorate or our transportation infrastructure becomes inadequate for our growing populations, it can have a disruptive impact on everyone's quality of life. For our city, water main breaks, traffic jams, and flooding. When I became mayor in 2019, it was clear that Tampa's aging water infrastructure was a very serious problem. Entire neighborhoods had pipes that were put down 100 years ago. 60% of our wastewater pipes are over 50 years old. Every year, hundreds of water main breaks shut down our streets and literally cost millions to repair. Collapsed wastewater lines caused sinkholes in our streets, and heavy summer rains caused streets to flood and shut down entire corridors. My predecessor established a citywide assessment to pay for major stormwater projects throughout our city, and my administration continues to implement that plan that was put in place over 10 years ago. That tells you how long these stormwater projects take. In terms of implementation challenges for stormwater, the greatest hurdle has been the funding. Since the passage of the assessment, the cost of doing these projects, which I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about today, has increased significantly. And at the same time, state support in Florida for stormwater projects has become less reliable. Thankfully, we've been able to move forward by seeking additional outside sources of funding, but we will need to identify additional grant programs and local funding to complete our stormwater projects. When it comes to drinking water and wastewater, in 2019, we passed a plan that we call PIPES, and that funds $3 billion of water infrastructure, including making major upgrades to our water treatment facilities, and yes, literally hundreds of miles of new pipes. We've made significant strides in pipeline installation and construction over the last few years. Since fiscal year 2020, we've successfully installed 48 miles of pipe, and our team currently has the next round of projects in the works. We currently have 31 miles of drinking water pipeline under construction and an additional 34 miles in design. In the past 4 years, we've awarded contracts for over 144 miles of wastewater gravity rehabilitation projects. And I know these things to most people aren't sexy, but it's absolutely fascinating to me and necessary. To optimize our resources, we're exploring alternative installation methods such as pipe bursting, simply amazing, horizontal directional boring, and the fiberglass lining of our wastewater pipes. And this saves not only on the restoration costs, but it extends the impact of our capital improvement dollars. So my suggestion to local cities would be look to innovative solutions. In terms of implementation, one of the greatest challenges of many of these projects is that they can be incredibly disruptive for neighborhoods and businesses. Street closures can last for months in some instances. With stormwater projects, the systems being installed or upgraded are often neighborhood-wide and can take months, if not years, to complete. And there's issues with dust during the dry season and mud during the rainy season. So to the local municipalities, I cannot emphasize enough how important communication is. We require that our contractors on these big projects have a communications team. These teams knock on doors and meet with residents one-on-one. They also send project updates so that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We say everyone is all for growth and progress until they're personally affected by it. So it's very important. And have all of our projects been perfect? No, they haven't. One lesson that we learned is that our city neighborhood engagement and communications teams need to stay on top of how and how often contractors communicate with the residents. And we need to go above and beyond to ensure that the residents are being heard. Just a quick example of this, we're doing a really large stormwater project in a neighborhood, and we just dug up, you can't put 8-foot diameter connection pipe in a weekend. So we dug up one of our major roadways that happened to be right in front of a florist right before Mother's Day. So we had to go out, did a huge social media project initiative towards that, and I actually delivered flowers for that florist on Mother's Day. So there's nothing that you can't do there's not enough that you can do to make sure that you're taking care of your community in these instances. So when it comes to federal infrastructure funding for water projects, we're going to take advantage of any opportunity that we can. But the lessons and challenges that I've just discussed really apply to so many infrastructure projects, regardless of what the funding sources are. So as many of you heard, the city of Tampa, besides being successful with our sports teams, has been pretty successful when it comes to securing federal infrastructure dollars for transportation. Thank you, Mayor Pete and team. One of the reasons is that a lot of our planning is done. It's done ahead of time so that we have projects that are ready to be implemented. The two greatest challenges for transportation projects are time and money. The bipartisan infrastructure law helps address the money issue, but the planning takes a great deal of time. The lesson to other cities is to invest in planning now. In Tampa, we've completed citywide mobility and Vision Zero plans. At the same time, we're updating our long-range comprehensive plan so that future growth in transportation are viewed holistically, since the two are so tied together. In response to Vision Zero and other policy directives, Tampa's mobility department has shifted its focus away from funding those larger capital projects and instead focusing on smaller scale, quick build safety projects that can be implemented quickly and more cost effective while still making significant safety impacts in our community. Earlier this year, the city of Tampa was awarded a Safe Streets for All $20 million federal grant with a $5 million match to improve the quality of life for Tampa's residents and visitors by quickly rolling out low-cost, high-impact projects. This grant will exponentially expand our quick build program budget. Again, thank you, Department of Transportation. We were successful with this grant in part because we did our homework. We created a Vision Zero action plan, identified our high injury network, and are directing 74% of this funding to underserved communities, which carry a disproportionate burden of deadly and life-altering crashes. The projects are focused on increasing safety for the city's most vulnerable roadway users through physical safety improvements and a collaborative planning effort. To ensure we're getting the biggest return on investment with grant opportunities and aligning them with Tampa's priorities, we're doing things as a city to set us up for success. Our core project aspects, community engagement, contract admin, placemaking, equal business opportunity, DEI, including workforce development and our apprenticeship program, along with sustainability and resiliency, are considered and aligned with our major priorities. And our major priorities are investing and connecting our communities and bringing Tampa together by connecting our neighborhoods, connecting our residents to opportunities, and connecting our diverse population to one another. Moving forward, new cost-effective methods of delivering transportation projects and maintaining existing assets must be identified to keep up with our city's growing needs. We're seeing significant increases in every area. With all these infrastructure projects, there's clearly a workforce shortage that also is going to be discussed. The City of Tampa is filling our workforce development gap by training our own people, investing in our staff, and growing our own workforce. This provides us cost savings by using in-house labor versus contractor work. And just to give you an example of this, a recent repaving contract that would have been outsourced at a cost of $250,000 was completed in-house for $132,000. The cost differential exhibits how over just a few projects, there's a very strong benefit-cost ratio. Because of rising costs nationwide and a clear need, the recent federal laws are just the beginning of what it'll take to transform and modernize infrastructure. On the local level, I would advise everyone to plan ahead, innovate, and collaborate. It's critically, critically important. And it's going to take all of us, our combined commitment of the cities, counties, and states, along with federal leaders, to tackle what is one of the greatest challenges of our time. It will take time working together at different levels of government, but we also have to do that within our own communities. The Undersecretary of Transportation visited Tampa recently with his team. And we talked about a number of projects that we were implementing or had planned for the future. And in one of our conversations, he said that he visited a lot of cities around the nation. And one of the things that the mayors always asked was, what do I want to take back from this city? What can I take from my city and implement or take from someone else's city and implement in mine? And when he asked me, what do they want to take from Tampa back to their city? I said the one thing they can't have, and that's the relationships. So please make sure that you're collaborating, you're developing those relationships across all lines and all boundaries. So thank you to everyone who has stepped up on the federal, state, and local level to help transform Tampa's tomorrow and our entire nation. So I wish you all the best, and again, thank you for this opportunity.
Shelley and I were, who I'm about to introduce in a second, we're giggling constantly during that because I'm not sure what you need from us anymore after the mayor just spoke with really such eloquence and like every policy shop's talking points, like on both sides of the aisle. I mean, it was just a tour de force of how important everything is.
So true.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, that was great. I'm not biased at all, though. So, okay. So let's jump into it. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to where my notes are. I really was just overwhelmed by how great that was. And the other thing Shelley asked, she's like, will this be available? Yes, this, as people are not only streaming live, hundreds of people, but the video will be on the web forever. So we can all go clip talking points from what the mayor just did. Where I want to kind of start for the context here, besides thanking the mayor, is, really getting down into the challenges. This is a big week to talk about the opportunities. It's a big week to talk about how, frankly, great things are and how thankful we are to Congress for delivering what they have, and that's all true. But as I kind of mentioned lightly in my intro, and now I think we'll dive into a little bit more here, and folks know the title here of the event, there's some real challenges. There's some real headwinds, and it's nice to invest, but we have to do so much more and frankly need to overcome many of those. So it wouldn't be a Brookings event if I didn't drop some numbers. So let me do that really quick. First of all, inflation, right? 2 infrastructure-specific commodity indexes within the producer price index are both up about 25% from just January 2021 to December 2022. To be clear, that is double the consumer price index that all of us see at the grocery stores and in restaurants and in other places, right? Revenues at the public, at the state and local level are down significantly, and there's real reason to believe they might continue to do so. Interest rates. Muni debt issuances or municipal debt issuances in December 2022 were half of their level in December 2021, right? And there's real reasons to have concern going forward on our ability to capitalize in private financial markets. Workforce shortages are real. And as our colleague Joe Kane just pointed out in a recent piece, separations could easily surpass new recruitments into the sector. So as we heard from the mayor too, there are real workforce shortages and the need to invest more in our people. And finally, what I think we also heard from the mayor, but I think where hopefully we can start, is the plans. What are we even trying to build and achieve? And it's, one infrastructure project is one infrastructure project. But I mean, this is really about community vision, helping deliver economic competitiveness, prosperity to all. So with that, we have a fantastic panel to really dig into this, and I can really step out of the way, and I'm so excited for you all to hear from them. This is truly a group of friends on the stage that I get to talk to regularly, so I'm excited that you all now get to hear from them. So we're actually going to move from my far left closer to me. So Judith Dangerfield is the Managing Director of Racial Equity Governing Agenda at PolicyLink. I like to say Judith is one of the people that's leading all of the good fights. So including as the Director of Supplier Diversity for the City of New Orleans, and for 3 years as a federal monitor for the consent decree between the U.S. Justice Department, New Orleans Police Department, and the City of New Orleans, and that work continues now. She is an expert in a range of issues that are all happening, both at the capital level, but on the planning and kind of social level of infrastructure. Blair Levin is legitimately one of the country's leading experts on broadband policy and the telecommunications industry. His bona fides are real. He was the chief of staff at the FCC in the 1990s. He's the lead author of the National Broadband Plan, counsel to many top shelf actors in this space. I can pretty much just stop there. He's also a non-resident senior fellow here at Brookings, though, so we've got some additional representation on the stage. And finally, Shelley Poticha, who really needs no introduction to many people in this room. She is the chief climate strategist right now at the National Resources Defense Council. But Shelley also led the Federal Partnership for Sustainable Communities and launched the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. So we've got some real all-stars here. Here's where I want to start, everyone. Defining success. I think for so long, and for many of the colleagues, frankly, just in the room and streaming today, success was, we want to get these bills over the finish line. Well, that's not success anymore, right? Now success is, what are they going to deliver? So I'm actually going to start with Blair, but because in many ways I think the broadband stuff is so exciting and frankly so new to so many people in this space, even though we've been talking about you much longer than me. But can you talk a little bit about what are you looking for these kind of new programs and to deliver the projects on the ground, but also even a step back from that, what does success even look like in this space?
So success looks pretty simple. Networks everywhere, everyone on. Networks everywhere means every location in the United States has access to what you would regard as robust or future-proof broadband. Everyone on means that everyone can both afford it and has the digital skills to do it. And you mentioned that it's new. One of the things that I think distinguishes the broadband effort from other efforts is it really required all of the states to set up brand new offices that are essentially startups to spend the money. And there are enormous challenges with that. I think there's a lot of good work going on. The key thing to getting it done, of course, was the money. And another interesting thing about broadband is not only did it fund the hard infrastructure of networks to rural areas, but also the soft infrastructure of subsidizing low-income persons. The problem is that money may run out. So lots of challenges in different ways, but I think at least the indicia of success are pretty clear.
Yeah, that's great. basically same question to you, Shelley, but switching kind of to, let's say, the more traditional infrastructure, when we use that word in DC, transportation, water resources. What does success look like, and do you think we're going to be able to deliver it here?
Well, I'd love to see every mayor across the country speak just like the mayor of Tampa, having that real strategy ready to go, ready to implement, thinking about people and their health, their ability to connect to the economy, and the quality of life. So if we could have more cities doing that, that would be a big win. But I think one of the bigger sort of stepping back issues is that a majority of these monies are going through existing funding streams. They were never built for innovative, people-centered work. We have so many transportation projects on the books that I'm seeing states across the country just, oh my God, I get to finally build that bypass freeway, even though we all know that that kind of infrastructure is last century, not forward-looking. So a big challenge for us going forward is really bending the curve so that we start to see the monies actually going toward community priorities. And then I'll also just bring in, this is our opportunity to jumpstart the clean energy revolution that this country needs to be on in order to meet our climate goals. I think one of the things that has really been a challenge with the bipartisan infrastructure law is that it did not have any equity and climate provisions due to the agreement that was made. The Inflation Reduction Act did. It really focuses on climate. Let's hope that we really are able to deliver through these mechanisms to really make the difference that we need to now.
It's great, thank you. You just said community, the mayor said community. Judith, I want to throw it to you as someone who's worked at the truly local level for so long and really trying to make sure all the voices are heard. What does success look like to you, and what's your confidence here we're going to be able to deliver on it?
So what we know historically, this is a great infrastructure moment. This is not the first. Mm-hmm. And in a great infrastructure moment with tremendous investment, there's going to be benefits and there's going to be burden. We know that the burden disproportionately affects low-income communities and communities of color. That is not up for debate. Success in this moment acknowledges that. There's going to be benefit, there's going to be burden, and balances the harm and the benefits so that all of the benefits don't go to the business community and all of the burden don't go to low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous communities, territories, that there is benefit for all. That's number one. But then the other part of that is recognizing the last time we did this, we harmed communities. Mm-hmm. Fixing that harm is not a benefit. That's debt service. We have to do that first, and then move to the benefits and the innovations that we bring into all of the communities. And then the last thing we have to remember is that, $1 trillion, that is a big market impact. That is a tremendous market impact, and we can't just say we are responsible for the $1 trillion that the government is investing, because the market pressure on these communities we know is going to lead to gentrification and displacement. Mm-hmm. So how do we make sure that this investment is not just for economic growth, but it actually benefits all of the people who are living, working, playing, learning, worshiping in the places where we're making these investments? And whether or not we can do it, I think we have a commitment from our federal administration to do it. I think we have to really stand up cities and states. The mechanisms that Shelley talked about, they weren't ready for innovation, they weren't ready for equity either. So we have to make sure all of those systems and structures and institutions are prepared to do both.
Great, thank you. Let me open up to everyone and kind of really get some conversation going here. Unfortunately, we got to be respectful of time, because I think the four of us could stand up here for about 2 to 3 hours and everyone would leave and we just keep talking. But let's bundle a bunch of headwinds here together, because again, I think boosterism has a place and it's important, but that doesn't necessarily get everything over the finish line, especially projects at a local level. So between inflation, interest rates, workforce, right? What, and others, frankly, what's your level of concern on maybe any one of those components? What are you worried about getting in the way of basically like what was often called, or still sometimes called in right capital markets, deal flow, if you will, but from a infrastructure standpoint, are we going to get the deal flow that folks are expecting? And if not, what's your expectations on what's holding it back? So again, open to everyone, whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I'll go first. We'll get the deal flow, but we won't get the full bang for the buck. It is historically unfortunate in a way that the private markets started saying we need to upgrade the fiber footprint of the United States in about 2018 or so. And so now all the public efforts to build fiber in rural America are essentially competing for both equipment and supplies as well as for labor with the private market. AT&T, Frontier, and other companies are building without government support. So the workforce development the workforce problem is very significant. The private equity research group that I work with said that the average inflation last year for fiber projects was about 20%. And we, in a way, I wouldn't say we waste 2 years, but from a pure economic perspective, it's going to look like we wasted 2 years waiting for the FCC to finish up its map. We would have been better off just spending the money with a bad map. I don't quite want to say it that way, but that actually is practically true, because though there would have been some wasted expenditures, sitting behind with 20% inflation and the workforce problems is going to end up meaning that we thought we could connect 100% of the locations, and maybe it'll end up being 99%, something like that. But there will be deals.
And I think that the government has put a whole lot of systems and structures in place to support the deal flow, the Transportation, Infrastructure, Finance, and Innovation Act. And then there's one like that for water, and there's one like that for carbon, which is really great because it has a Justice 40 requirement. I think we're going to get the deal flow. I think the deal flow, though, tends to be very property-centered and not necessarily people-centered. So I think the challenge is, how do we make the deal flow people-centered? And that means it's a zero-sum game. How are we going to balance that? And how are we going to make sure the market is responsive to what it is that we're trying to do for the people, not just for the places? And how do we move away from that you break it, you buy it syndrome, where we can disinvest in the community and drive the value so low? Now we can buy it up, the hedge funds can buy it up, and we can make it really pretty. And it looks like we really have a great project, but what we don't have is a really great project for the people.
I was going to say something very similar to what Judith just said, that we've seen this happen over and over again. Big funding comes in, the places that are ready with their pipeline of projects, their deal flow are the cream of the crop, the easy stuff. And yet we have a real problem in America where we have really disinvested and almost created disinvestment through our policies in so many places. And so we have a lot of education that needs to happen. We also need to come in and really support and make sure that the communities that are really intended to be the focus of, say, a Justice 40 initiative, that they can compete and get into the deal, as well as the always well-resourced communities. So it's going to take kind of a different way of looking at, quote, opportunity for investment.
Yeah, and you bring up local capacity, right, which we've been hearing from the beginning, both from the administration, outside sources, just saying, hey, first step, recognizing you got a problem, right, and hey, we have a capacity problem. Blair, we've been talking about this, right, at this kind of startup level, right? We've got a capacity problem in states on the broadband side too, right?
Absolutely. The 50 states all had to set up broadband offices, spending orders of magnitude more money than they ever had to do before, having to figure out. They all want to draw maps that mean all unserved locations will be served, whereas the suppliers want to draw maps that emphasize the economic efficiency for them. So there's an awful lot of problems in doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, these are real constraints. No, it looks like.
Well, I think another constraint, putting on my kind of hat that's looking at the clean energy revolution, we are introducing a kind of almost a new way of fueling our communities. Wind and solar being very competitive economically, but there's a stigma. There's a stigma that has really been attached to it for political reasons in many communities. And so another barrier that I think is out there is this growth in what I call preemption laws at the state level that are often making it difficult for a local community to really move forward into the 21st century and invest in the kind of energy systems that both make them more resilient, help us with our climates, and also can be a community investment in itself.
Yeah, and even the preemption's complicated, right? Because then on the housing side, we'd
Right.
love the states to step in to help more construction in many places. In other ways, they can get in the way of local innovation. So a lot of complexities in the legal structure here. Again, being respectful of time, there's something really big I want to hit, which the mayor helped set the table for us, and all three of your introductions in different way, which is kind of defining. I'm using this term clumsily, like community ROI, right? Touched on your success measures. Back to this, what we're trying to achieve. So we've got some clear, almost like fixed elements blocking us. Again, to kind of parrot poorly the mayor's words, right? If you don't have this community buy-in, right, it's going to slow progress down. Do you feel like, and maybe Judith, I'd love to start with you, especially with so much of the work you've done for decades on this. I mean, do you feel like as you're now going around the country even more than down in New Orleans, do you feel like you're hearing that community level of buy-in was done in advance? Or to kind of borrow Shelley's words, the project pipeline in advance wasn't done. They weren't ready for it.
So I think what we've seen from community more than anything is the visibility. Because there are so many requirements for community engagement, that the communities have more visibility. But I think what's helping more than anything, you see a number of these funding sources or funding streams that require community benefits agreements. And that's really important, particularly like in places in the South where you have right-to-work states and you don't have collective bargaining, but you do have a mechanism for communities to actually negotiate the terms of the investment, the jobs, the wages, affordable housing. So I think we're seeing a lot more participation, a lot more collaboration. I think the community benefits agreement that had been placed in some of the funding sources has helped with that. It hasn't been placed in all of the funding sources yet. And I think as we move forward, we need to see more of that. Energy is using it for the electric battery stuff. It's in the carbon fund, the electric vehicle fund, but not every fund, not every funding source requires it. And it's particularly important in those places where we have right-to-work states and collective bargaining is not available to community to make sure the people who need the jobs and can do the jobs can get the jobs with a good wage and a good set of benefits in the future for themselves and their families.
Yeah, Blair.
I think on the broadband side, it's interesting because there's an awful lot of outreach going on, but there's a big difference in my view between the outreach, the importance of the outreach related to the broadband deployment and the broadband, what we might think of as inclusion. On the deployment side, there just really aren't that many options. It's just you're building a fiber network for the most part, and it's very economically and technologically driven. And so the community input, they all want it. And if they didn't want it before COVID, everybody wants it after that. However, so I think we're kind of over-indexing on that one, but on the digital inclusion and equity and opportunity side, we may be under-indexing because that's where it's really important, because the communities where you have low levels of adoption are often very, very different. And so figuring out how to get the local churches engaged or the other community organizations, that really is a people-intensive business, and it's incredibly important. And for the first time, there's money to do that, but there's a big difference between those two tasks and the nature of the community, the value of the community input.
Yeah, especially let's really lean into the NRDC part of your title, if you will, right? Are you all seeing the kind of environmental justice moves I think Judith was kind of just outlining there in terms of, again, you spoke a lot about the federal side, but are the states and localities showing the willingness to do the kind of work that, again, the Tampa mayor kind of outlined that they're doing at least?
Yes and no. So
being recorded, so.
I mean, I was in government during ARA. What is
The last stimulus
the
in
last
2009.
stimulus? And it is a very different space at the local level than, 8-10 years ago. There's so much more community capacity and organizations that are rooted in community, that are out there really listening, really trying to kind of get in the game and be vocal and assert their views. There's a lot more of that. The challenge is, to me, is that so much of these monies are controlled by the states and governors. And when you have a bunch of awesome community leaders that might be in a very progressive city trying to influence the rules of the game at the state, it's extremely hard. So we did see executive orders passed by governors during the COVID stimulus. And Treasury required each state that wanted to receive monies to make some commitments to, or say what their commitments to environmental justice and equity would be. That has not happened with these funds. So we have to this is just a hurdle that we really need to start bringing into all levels, because if we have a real disconnect between this rich, on-the-ground capacity and a big block up at the state level, it's going to be hard to see these monies actually landing in the way that we want them to.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the requirement for a community benefits agreement is so important.
Yes.
It's not an option.
Right.
If you want these funds, if you want to make this investment, you are required to negotiate on behalf of the community the benefits that they're going to receive from the investment. And I think that's important for us to remember.
Do you think this is something the legislatures are open to, including on digital equity, right? I mean, just across the sectors here. Is this something that they might be willing to do the same way, right? The feds are trying to push it down. You're exactly right. This is the, let's get down to brass tacks. This is the legal structure of the system. The states have a bunch of independence for some deeper seated, that's a different debate somewhere at Brookings, a different day, right? On whether they should have this much authority. I'm not arguing it. I'm just saying that's where it is. So I'm asking all three of you. I mean, do you think the states will step up to make sure you get that kind of reform? Or are we going to see a laboratory of democracy and different states are going to do different things?
Well, probably the latter, probably the laboratory. But I think one of the challenges for advocates like me is translating my language to bring in the stakeholders that are necessary in order to shift the rules of the game at the state level. And so an example of that is, the solar industry really needs to grow at, quadruple the level that they're at right now. Many of the sites that they're looking at are farms and forests. We have to start really looking at, how do we speak farmer language and really understand the business of timber, and really understand how do we bring those folks into the conversation so at maybe a more conservative state level, we're setting the table for the community benefits discussion.
Yeah, and we have to understand the federal government can't do it all. There's a really great 14th Amendment. There's also a really great 10th Amendment. Mm-hmm. So we have to be prepared to influence those state structures. So my portfolio at PolicyLink used to be federal policy and advocacy. Now it's half federal policy, the other half is states, because we understand if we're really going to address the systems and structures that we need to advance equity, it can't just be the federal government. It has to be the federal government and the state's government working together or working against each other, but getting it done at the end of the day.
On the broadband side, it's going to be laboratories of democracy, but that kind of tension between kind of the rural-dominated state legislatures and governors versus the big cities, we're seeing play out in lots of different ways. It's actually not, in broadband, it's really not true. And what I would say is that COVID was a much better evangelist for universal broadband than those of us who worked on the National Broadband Plan 10 years earlier. I am always astonished by not astonished, but by how progressive, very conservative Republican governors are when it comes to broadband, because in March of 2020, suddenly they understood that if seniors didn't have access, the healthcare system would fail. If kids didn't have access, the education system would fail. So we're all kind of progressives on broadband now, I think.
I think that's it's certainly the quote for the panel, so we're all right. I want to be really respectful of all of y'all who have come. People have submitted questions in advance. I want to make sure you all get a chance to get some quick closing remarks before you can respond to some questions. So you can, at Brookings Metro is going to be the easiest way for us to see it. You can also use that hashtag if that's still a thing. And in general, we'll of course take questions from the audience here in as much time as we've got. And if I'm just going to say it now, in case we run out of time, we can stick around a little bit and answer more people's questions. But I want to give you all a chance to get some quick closing remarks. And in particular, this has been a nice public complaint session. Let's end with some positivity here for a second. Judith, you said, and maybe we can even start with you too. Yeah, we'll get deal flow, meaning like projects will happen. There's some real challenges, but let's kind of hopefully end at least positive for this portion. What's some of the positive stuff you're expecting to see, and how do you think that could maybe set a positive agenda going forward? And that can kind of be the question, or the question to everyone, right? How do we see good things that inspire more states, localities, and even future Congresses and administrations, right, to continue to do good, if you will?
So a couple of things. I see a real intent on finding innovative and compelling ways to engage citizens and to figure out where citizens need to be engaged, how to connect citizens, not just in, we want to hear your ideas, but in the permitting process where that build, no build decision is made. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and a lot of that is going to be attributable to how communities are organizing. But the other thing I want to call out, as we looked at this work, and from my experience working on the ground, the Civil Rights Act, Title VI, has been complaint-based for decades. So it's assumed you haven't violated anybody's rights if nobody complained about it. So I saw come in my email a couple of weeks ago a proactive civil rights checklist from the FAA. So it looks like maybe we will start to look at the rights of citizens, the rights of people in places proactively, not just as an afterthought, not just, we gave you $900 million. Did you violate anybody's rights when you spend it? But to really start to hold communities accountable for balancing the benefits and the harms in the work.
There are these certain moments in history. Lincoln talked about, can a country survive half slave and half free? Roosevelt talked about a country 1/3 ill-housed, ill-clothed, ill-fed, where there's a recognition that there are certain divides we have to eliminate. And the nice thing about what's happening right now is we finally recognize that as to essentially digital access, which has been important for decades. In the age of artificial intelligence, it becomes more important. So I think actually what may be the most important thing are the digital inclusion, or what I think of as digital opportunity efforts, as much as building out the networks. And there's a lot of great activity going there. And I would just say, in my own work with certain states, it's so great to see America solve problems again, in a very bipartisan or nonpartisan way. Here's the problem, here's the resources, now let's solve it. It's just great to see that.
Yeah. Thank you. Shelley, bring us home.
So I am super excited about this moment. I think that this is a game changer to have these resources available, and frankly, an administration that is doing their part to ensure that the funds are spent as responsibly as possible. It's incredible. My personal goal is that I want to see a bunch of projects built that people in communities point to as demonstrating the future that we want to build going forward. And if we can get those fires lit in places that are not the usual places, not just the coastal communities, but throughout the country, that starts a really different conversation about how do we invest going forward. So that's my goal.
I love that. So I feel that every time I see a bike lane and a little rain garden off a road, like, this isn't hard. Like, we can build better. Yes. Let's give priority to those in the audience here. Who's got a question for the panel? Let's go right here, actually.
Hi, Rebecca Haywood from U.S. Digital Response. We're a nonprofit that supports state and local governments with pro bono technical assistance. One of the things that we hear a lot about in our work, and I think you all touched on it and the mayor mentioned it as well, is the idea of administrative burden and being able to apply for, spend, and report on all of this fantastic money that's available. The mayor mentioned contract administration as well. We saw it with the FCC challenge process and other things. I'm curious to hear from you all how we can be thinking about this in this moment, particularly some programs are new, some are existing. What opportunities do states have or the federal government have to really help look at this to get this money spent?
So the question's around administrative burden. How do you think we can manage it?
So this is a real challenge. And I think we need to start experimenting with different approaches. Like a little tiny example is that we've been seeding a set of what we call energy hubs in Midwestern states. These are folks that are tied to the state energy administration that know everything there is to know about every aspect of all the funding streams and how to deploy them. They're like navigators. And that kind of role is something we'd like to see exported and scaled. And that could happen in a lot of different other kinds of topics. So it's one idea. I think, frankly, in my world, philanthropy has really been a big part of filling that gap that doesn't necessarily happen by the government itself.
So in the equity space, we understand there's a cost if you're going to implement equitably, if you're really going to look at the impact on people. So our ask has been of the federal government to pay for that. When you supply the monies for the grant, supply the monies to make sure you get the targeted local hire or that you get the minority and women business spending, to pay for the proactive civil rights compliance, to pay for that, because it is going to be a bigger burden on communities, and particularly on the smaller communities or the less well-resourced communities. So we recognize there's an administrative burden, and we think that burden, the cost of that burden, should be a part of the grant and the resources that are going to communities.
Yeah, let's go. You had your hand up, yeah.
Thanks very much. Rick Rybeck with Just Economics. You were talking about the importance of changing the rules of the game and people versus place. Infrastructure is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we create it to facilitate development. But if we do a good job of it, it tends to inflate the value of land nearby, which, because we allow private landowners to appropriate that value, it becomes the fuel for land speculation, which is a real parasitic activity which harms job creation, affordable housing, a whole host of things. Not to mention, by inflating the land near the new infrastructure, it drives development to cheaper land that's in a remote location, and it fuels urban sprawl. A positive note is that in Pennsylvania, they allow jurisdictions to tax land values more heavily than building values. And this is unusual. One of the things that happened is that Pittsburgh, like a Rust Belt city, way outperformed other Rust Belt cities in terms of its ability to transition from manufacturing to a service-based economy. And a National Tax Journal article in 1997 showed that their tax system was partly responsible.
Rick, I'm going to ask you to ask a question.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you think that this approach of taxing land value more heavily than building therefore returning the value that infrastructure creates to the community that created it, rather than allowing it to be a windfall to speculators, if that has some promise.
I think Rick's asking around land value capture and where those revenues go, if anyone wants to.
So I wish I could answer that question. That would mean that I was an economist and I knew the answer. But I can say that that's what we're looking for. What kind of anti-displacement strategies, what kind of strategies that center the people do we need to insist accompanies these funds? I wish I knew the answer to that, but I will go and look it up because it sounds like an exciting opportunity to really protect the people in the places where we're making these investments.
Okay, let's make sure we get at least one more question right behind you, Karen.
Hi, Gordon Chaffin, ASCE. I'm struck by the comments from the mayor as well as all of you being very innovative and progressive on environmental justice. Obviously, the administration has Justice 40, but in the deployment of infrastructure for people versus materials, I guess. None of those things, as was mentioned, none of those things are statutorily enshrined in IIJA. So what is the tenability of the kinds of things you're talking about when I don't think a majority of either chamber on the Hill in state legislatures even support these things, at least being enshrined in law? It's a lot of administrative edict that doesn't sit on firm foundation.
Yeah, this is a great closing question. I think we're asking about the temporal nature here of what we're getting at. And any open thoughts there to close the program?
Well, I think you're raising a
Oh, do you want to ask that one in addition? Or? No, go ahead. Okay, we'll ask one more question
okay,
after this.
Great. Okay.
Second to last question.
Second to last question. We are in a really challenging moment in our country where we have a system that delivers one way. It has led to harm, environmental problems, inequity, and we're trying to build another system. And we need to be working at multiple levels constantly. So that's why I talked about lighting the fires, building those great projects that are universally embraced as a way of starting to show that we can do this. Those old monikers of like people versus profits, or, that's old think. Now, we also have to be thinking about the long game, because we all talk about this as an extraordinary moment, but this is a moment to build towards something that is much more lasting. And so we have to be thinking out further to the next transportation authorization, to the next tax code reform. We have to be thinking longer term, but as I have experienced working in government, you have to have proof points. And if you don't have those proof points, it's an intellectual conversation.
Can I just say, I think your characterization of the law may be accurate as to everything but broadband. On broadband, there are very specific provisions on equity and inclusion.
Yeah, and what I would quickly say is we, taking dealer's choice here, is Shelley just nailed it, so it's a huge plus one, and that's for everyone, is if we, working in DC, whichever side you're on, if you do not see this as a massive opportunity to create your receipts for the next set of debates, you cannot have a generational level investment and think that all sides of an aisle, if you will, whatever party structure you've got in your head, that they are not looking for what the evidence case is. There's probably an argument legally, which it's kind of like your economics answer as a non-economist. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm saying, legally speaking, you probably, as you want to experiment with things, I don't know if you want to enshrine those in law without having enough receipts. So if folks who have been advocating for things for decades now see an opening, this is a huge moment to show evidence that it works, right? Otherwise, the Hill staffers do not have what they need to actually change, right? And I just want to end with one important thing here. The last generation system, and this is where in many ways we are doing it now on broadband, was about economic competitiveness via connectivity, right? Making sure you could get places, people other goods as quickly as possible. We have built out that system. The question is, what is 21st century economic competitiveness in America look like? And that has not been answered in the infrastructure space at all. And this is why you see big debates around progress studies, supply side, not just progressivism, just supply side thinking. And that jury is still very much out. And that's where I think a lot of folks need to be doing work right now. Karen, okay, we've run out of time. I ran out the clock there, I think, unfortunately. So, hey, everyone, thank you for coming. Thanks to the organizers of at United for Infrastructure Week. It's a great week of conversations. Hopefully, almost all of these are online. I'm looking at my colleague Ross. You can find stuff. For all the folks streaming, thank you for joining us. And again, everyone have a great rest of your week.